The millionaire Japanese woman began to speak, but no one understood her. She sat at the long dining table, calm and graceful, speaking softly as she looked around the room. Her voice was gentle, her words unfamiliar. She motioned toward the vase of white lilies in the center of the table and said something with a small smile. Everyone stood still. The assistants looked at each other, unsure. One of the chefs quietly stepped back into the kitchen. Mrs. Lancaster, the wealthy woman hosting the lunch, nodded politely but didn't say a word. The room felt tense, not rude, just uncertain. People whispered. Someone pulled out a phone, typing quickly, maybe trying to translate. But before they could finish, a quiet voice spoke from the doorway. She said the lilies remind her of home. Heads turned. It was Grace, the maid. She stood with a dish towel in her hands, still wearing her apron. Her voice was clear, her face calm. The guest looked at her and smiled wide. She replied in the same language, and Grace answered right back. Fluent, confident, effortless. And in that moment, everything shifted. Because the person no one noticed had just become the one everyone needed. Like the video and subscribe if you believe that strength doesn't always shout. The maid spoke, in perfect Japanese, and everything shifted. What came after will surprise you. Grace stood there, quiet and steady, as the room stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. The millionaire guest said something else, faster this time, more excited, and Grace nodded, responding without hesitation. They were having a full conversation now, just the two of them, while everyone else stood silently on the outside. Mrs. Lancaster watched with a calm expression, but behind her eyes, something else flickered. A kind of pride. Like she knew what this moment meant. But not everyone was impressed. Wait a minute, said a voice from the other side of the room. It was Carol, the estate's longtime events director. She was sharp, polished, and used to being the most capable person in any room. She crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. You speak Japanese? Grace didn't flinch. Yes. Since when? Carol asked, her voice carrying a hint of laughter, like she thought maybe this was all some misunderstanding. Since I was 12, Grace said simply. That shut Carol up, for a second. Then came the smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Well, that's unexpected. She looked around, inviting others to share the joke. A few people chuckled, unsure what side they were supposed to be on. Grace turned back toward the guest, staying calm, focused, and respectful. She didn't need to prove anything. She just translated. Line by line. Word for word. Still, she could feel it. The eyes. The discomfort. The unspoken question behind it all. What is a maid doing speaking Japanese like that? The guest reached for Grace's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. She said something in a slower, more emotional tone. Grace hesitated for a breath. Then translated. She says, "Thank you for hearing her." And just like that, something in the room softened. But Carol stepped forward, not ready to let it go. You know, it's just strange. We've worked with you for over a year. You've cleaned our offices, served our tea, and never said a word about this. Grace turned to her, her voice even. No one ever asked. That sentence hit harder than anyone expected. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was revealing. Grace looked back at the guest, letting the words flow again, switching between languages with a gentle rhythm. But inside, her thoughts were stirring. She remembered sitting in a public library as a teenager, flipping through Japanese workbooks while her classmates waited for the school bus. Her mother used to shake her head. "Why that language?" she asked. "What good will that do here?" Grace didn't know then. Not really. She just knew that the language felt beautiful. Like a song she wanted to learn by heart. She studied quietly, borrowed tapes, practiced out loud in her room while scrubbing the floor with a towel. No tutors. No trips. Just patience. And now, here she was. Standing in a $1 million dining room, speaking it like it was second nature. Because to her, it was. Still, it wasn't just about the language. It was about the way people looked at her. Or didn't. She was the help. The background. The one who poured water, folded towels, scrubbed baseboards. She was kind, reliable, and invisible. Until now. Carol took a step closer, her tone sharper. Are you even allowed to interact like this during a formal meeting? Mrs. Lancaster finally spoke up, her voice soft but firm. She's doing exactly what needs to be done. Carol opened her mouth, then shut it. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Grace finished translating one last sentence. The guest stood, walked over to her, and bowed gently. Grace bowed back. The whole room watched in silence. And in that silence, Grace let herself feel it, just a little. The years of being underestimated. The long shifts. The sore hands. The missed chances. The moments she'd almost given up and told herself it didn't matter. But it did. Because right now, this wasn't just about knowing a language. It was about being seen. It was about showing up, doing the work, and letting the moment speak for itself. She didn't need applause. She didn't need approval. She just needed this one moment of truth. And she had it. What happens next will change everything. The room felt different now. Not louder, quieter, focused. Grace stood next to the guest, translating each sentence with calm precision. There was no rush in her voice, no need to impress. Just clarity. For the first time, everyone listened. The billionaire guest, whose name, they learned, was Mrs. Yamada, spoke about the lilies. About how they reminded her of the flowers her mother grew in the spring. About grief. About beauty. About finding small comfort in quiet places. And Grace translated it all, never skipping a word, her voice almost matching the woman's tone. Gentle. Honest. Steady. The staff, once whispering in confusion, now stood still, listening. Some shifted on their feet. Some folded their arms. But no one left. Mrs. Lancaster, seated at the far end of the table, watched it unfold like she'd been waiting for this moment. Like she already knew. And maybe she had. Carol stepped back now, silent. She glanced around, suddenly unsure of her place in the room. The power she usually carried seemed to shrink around her. Mrs. Yamada reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded paper. She handed it to Grace and said something that made her voice catch just slightly. Grace held the paper gently and read what was written. Then she looked up and spoke to the room. She says she came to discuss a memorial donation. A grant. For the hospital in her husband's name. That changed everything. People straightened up. Phones quietly slipped back into pockets. This wasn't just a courtesy visit. It was business. Big business. She needed someone she could trust. Someone who could hear her clearly. Without filters. Without guessing. Grace's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She was prepared to leave if no one understood her. The silence deepened. Mrs. Yamada spoke again, and this time, Grace didn't translate right away. She looked directly at Mrs. Lancaster. She says, she feels safe here now. And she wants to move forward. A soft smile spread across Mrs. Lancaster's face. She nodded. Once. Grace handed the paper to her boss, and as she stepped back, something in the room shifted again. Not just in how people looked at Grace, but in how she looked at herself. There was no applause. No dramatic music. Just a quiet realization settling over every person. There, Grace had been the most prepared person in the room all along. Her knowledge. Her patience. Her work. It hadn't come from spotlight or status. It came from years of showing up, staying curious, and refusing to stop growing, no matter how invisible she felt. She hadn't waited to be chosen. She hadn't begged to be noticed. She just was. And now, they finally saw her. Carol cleared her throat. I didn't realize you had that kind of background. Grace looked at her, not with anger, not even with pride. Just calm. I didn't think I had to explain it. Carol nodded slightly, her eyes dropping to the floor. Mrs. Yamada touched Grace's arm again. "You're the reason this conversation could happen," she said in English, her accent gentle but clear. Grace smiled. "I'm glad I could help." But it wasn't just help. It was leadership. She had bridged the gap between two worlds, without ever raising her voice, without pushing anyone aside. She didn't just speak a language. She honored it. And in doing so, she reminded everyone what real power looks like: quiet, earned, rooted in truth. As the room slowly began to move again, people packing up, papers being gathered, polite voices rising back into small talk, Grace stepped back into the background. But this time, no one forgot she was there. She had changed the room. And that kind of presence doesn't go unnoticed for long. Sometimes, strength doesn't roar. Sometimes, it speaks softly, and everyone listens. The meeting wrapped up slowly, like a storm had passed and left everything still. People moved more carefully now. Voices stayed quiet, thoughtful. No one rushed to speak first. Mrs. Yamada stood with Grace for a few more moments, speaking softly, sharing a gentle laugh. The two women, so different in background, so connected in this moment, looked at ease beside each other. Like equals. Across the room, Carol watched them. Her arms were crossed, but the tension was gone. She looked down, then walked over, stopping just a step away from Grace. She didn't force a smile this time. She didn't pretend. "I didn't know you had it in you," she said. Her voice was lower now. Not cold, just honest. "I underestimated you." Grace nodded. "A lot of people do." Carol looked her in the eye. "Well, not anymore." Then she stepped back, giving Grace space. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was something. A start. Other staff members slowly gathered around. "Grace, what was she saying when she looked at the painting?" one of the assistants asked. "Something about the flowers." Grace smiled gently. She said they reminded her of the ones her grandmother used to paint. She said it made her feel calm. The assistant nodded, eyes wide. "Wow! I never would have guessed. That's beautiful." Another asked, "Did you study in college?" Grace shook her head. "No. I just taught myself. Library books. Practice tapes. I used to write down new words while I was on my lunch break." They all looked at her differently now. Not with pity. Not with surprise. With respect. She hadn't made a speech. She hadn't demanded credit. But her work had spoken for itself. Mrs. Lancaster approached quietly, her heels soft against the marble floor. She looked at Grace for a long moment, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You held that room together," she said. Grace met her eyes. "I just did what needed to be done." That's exactly why it mattered. Mrs. Lancaster glanced toward the window, where Mrs. Yamada was now being escorted to her car. "She told me she's moving forward with the donation. A full partnership. She said it's because she felt understood, for the first time in a long time." Grace didn't say anything. She just nodded once. The meaning was clear. Mrs. Lancaster gave her a warm smile. "We'll be talking more, you and I. Soon." Then she turned and left, her voice already returning to business as she gave instructions to her assistant. Grace looked around the room. Same furniture. Same people. Same job title. But everything had changed. Not because she showed off. Not because she proved anyone wrong. But because she stayed true to herself. Quietly, steadily, and the truth finally rose to the surface. She picked up her dish towel from where she'd left it. Her shift wasn't over. There were still things to clean. But now, when she walked through the room, people stepped aside. They made eye contact. They saw her. And even though she didn't ask for it, they listened. A young intern approached her near the kitchen door. Barely out of college, nervous, notebook in hand. "Grace," she said, shyly, "can I ask you something?" Grace turned, surprised. "Sure. What made you want to learn Japanese?" Grace paused. She looked at the girl's notebook, full of scribbles and lists. She remembered being that age. All questions, no answers. I don't know, she said. Something about the way it sounded. The rhythm of it. It just felt right. So I kept going. The intern nodded, thoughtful. I've been trying to teach myself French. I just get frustrated. Then take your time, Grace said gently. Don't wait for someone to notice. Do it for you. The intern smiled. Thanks. Grace gave a small nod and turned back toward the kitchen. Same routine. Same steps. But something inside her had settled. She wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be seen. Not to be praised. She knew who she was. And now, so did everyone else. Because quiet work, done with heart, always finds its way to the light. A week later, the sun poured into the Ashford estate just like before, but the feeling inside the house was different. Lighter. The halls were still quiet. The silver still gleamed. The routine hadn't changed much on the surface. But people paused now. They looked up when Grace walked by. They said her name with warmth. And for the first time, Grace had a new task. She stood at the front of the staff conference room, a whiteboard behind her, a black marker in her hand. Around the table sat the housekeeping staff, the front desk coordinator, 2 assistants, and even Carol, pen in hand, eyes focused. Mrs. Lancaster sat in the back, watching with her usual calm, but now with something else in her expression, trust. Today we're starting with greetings and introductions, Grace said. We'll focus on simple phrases. The kind that make someone feel welcome before you even speak their language. She began writing. Clear, slow, simple strokes. Try this one, Hajimemashite. It means nice to meet you. The staff repeated it, a little unsure at first. Grace smiled. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be sincere. One of the assistants raised her hand. Are we going to keep doing this every week? Grace looked at Mrs. Lancaster, who gave a small nod. Yes, Grace said. Every Thursday morning. A beginner's workshop for anyone who wants to learn. We'll build from there. The room felt steady, open. She could see it, the quiet excitement in people's eyes. Not just about the language, but about the chance to learn, to grow. And this time, they weren't looking past Grace. They were looking to her. Later that afternoon, Grace walked through the garden behind the estate. The same garden she used to sweep quietly before anyone else arrived. Now, she walked beside Mrs. Lancaster. No uniforms. Just 2 women under the open sky, talking like equals. She was very clear in her message, Mrs. Lancaster said. Mrs. Yamada wants you to be the bridge between our team and her foundation. Grace blinked, unsure. You mean, like a translator? More than that, Mrs. Lancaster replied. A cultural advisor. A partner in communication. She trusts you. So do I. Grace took a deep breath. The air smelled like lavender and cut grass. It felt real, but also unbelievable. She didn't ask for this. She didn't plan for it. But it was here. And it fit. Back inside, the kitchen buzzed with low voices and clinking plates. Someone had taped a list of Japanese words to the wall, Grace's handwriting at the top. Even Carol had started greeting people with a careful, konnichiwa. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Things were changing. Slowly, quietly, but truly. Not because someone gave a speech. Because someone stayed ready. And now, doors were opening that no one had even thought to unlock before. That night, after the rooms were cleaned and the dishes were put away, Grace sat in the small break room, a notebook open in her lap. She didn't write anything. She just sat there, listening to the soft hum of the building around her. She thought about her mother. About those long afternoons folding laundry and practicing words. No one else cared about. She smiled. Not because she had made it. But because she didn't have to prove anything anymore. She had become exactly who she was meant to be. One word at a time. One quiet step at a time. And now, people were finally listening. Because real change doesn't shout. It shows up. And stays. And sometimes, it speaks a language no one expects. Have you ever been overlooked, until the moment you weren't? Grace's story is a reminder. Quiet strength matters. The work you do, even when no one sees it, counts. What's something people don't know about you? Tell us in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, share it. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us, sometimes, the quietest voice changes everything. Thank you for staying till the end.